fix the live stream connecting to LinkedIn issue. That would be fantastic. But I'm Evan Patterson, they, and I work here at Worklyfe, and I'm joined by John, I always say your last name wrong because you told me the correct way to pronounce it, but now I'm self-conscious about my ability to pronounce it, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Yeah,
I've been working on it.
My name is John Alarcon, co-founder at Worklyfe. Just a short little bit about us. We really focus and emphasize helping people find out their personal happiness equation, so the things that they care about that are meaningful in their lives, and we work with companies to basically run their incentive, their recognition, and their fringe benefits programs through a work-life balance to help those things come to reality. So we're all about helping companies enable their people to do the things in life that they want to do so they can do their best work.
Awesome. Well, before we bring on our guest, Alex, who has a story that we definitely want to dive into, who is the co-founder and CEO at Performic. I'm sure Alex Furman will correct me if I mispronounced that company's name just now. But before we do that, John, how did you and Alex meet?
Yeah, so we actually met pretty recently. We're fellow portfolio companies, so we're all under the Surface VC portfolio umbrella, and they've been awesome to us as kind of like pre-seed investors. They do a really great job of like giving us space, but also like providing guidance. And we're all in the Slack channel. I actually met his other co-founder, and as we were talking about the show, we're like, oh, we got to do a show. And so, yeah, I'm super excited to have Alex on. And I think the context of how Performica came to be is really interesting. I'm hoping that the viewers and the people that watch this later, can kind of like get a really cool glimpse of what performance management looks like at a very large scale, given his past, and then what it can look like going forward, even for smaller organizations. So, and of course, we'll talk a little bit about, well, what the heck do you do about it once you actually identify your top people? So, so really excited for this conversation.
Well, I'll let that be our segue, and we'll bring on Alex himself. Hello, cool. Alex. Welcome.
Hey, good to see you both. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being had. So John has been telling me this story that you have to tell that is apparently very interesting and intriguing to help paint the picture for this. I've heard Cliff Notes version of it. So, tell us why this topic means so much to you. And I'm sure that informs a bit of, Performica's existence.
Yeah, absolutely. And at least I think it's kind of a cool story. So my career, I'm a software engineer by background. So my career started in engineering. I spent a bunch of years in fintech, building trading systems. And then at some point in time, through a strange turn of events, I wound up co-founding a biotech company called Invite in 2011 as a technical co-founder. And Invite really took off. It took us a couple of years to get the tech to work and for sales to start happening and so on. And now we're in 2014-ish, and as a business, we're crushing. So it's all working. We're talking to investment bankers. We wound up taking it public in 2015. At the same time, organizationally, we're hit by being completely unprepared for hyperscale. So that year, we went from 20-ish people to a couple of hundred people. And all hell started breaking loose. Politics started emerging, decisions stopped getting made. A lot of our strengths turned into weaknesses. I realized that HR is a thing. So up until that point, had an office manager run payroll every once in a while, and that was pretty much that. And by the time I realized HR is a thing, I also realized that at least temporarily, I thought it was temporary, I need to take this up. Because we're on a burning platform here. It's hard to imagine making a bet on an outsider to come in and put out our fires. I'm scared that we have this wonderful thing going and we're about to mess it up. So in what I thought was a crisis management exercise, I stepped into the head of HR role and then spent the next year kind of managing us out of the mess we got in, reorganizing, hiring some people, firing some people, that sort of thing. So I like to joke that my first and last, well, never say never, but probably last job as an HR practitioner was a chief people officer of a publicly traded company. Only happens in Silicon Valley, folks.
I was going to say that's a very niche environment for this to happen.
It's funny, right? It's a funny thing. And then a year later, I realized I'm staying, and partially because I fell in love with the space, and it just became so clear to me that there's so much leverage in how we like work with our people and how we organize work and so on. Like there's like it's so magical when you get that right. The downside is equally terrible, and we've all seen terrible or many of us have seen terrible cultures and what that does to people. And the other worth mentioning, and also the person who took over engineering from me was smarter than him. So like, so it wouldn't have been the right answer for me to kind of step back and move aside. So here I am, head of HR. The company's kind of humming along. We're in a good spot. We're growing. We're doubling every year for like many years in a row. And I want data. Like we're past the Dunbar number. I don't know everybody anymore. New hires like meet me in the cafeteria and ask me what department I work for. I want a better handle.
I've made that mistake in my career also.
It wasn't a mistake, and I give random answers, by the way, just to mess with people, at least at first.
Okay. I like at least that first part.
Yeah, at some point I stopped, but for a while I'd say, "Oh, I'm in facilities." But so here we are. I need to better understand how work happens, performance, and so on. And I start looking at all of these tools that are out there. Like I'm looking for good HR software, and it hit me like a ton of bricks that the way these tools are arranged, the way the previous generation tools are arranged, like doesn't answer any of the questions that I have. Like they're all very org charty. So like the way you look at orgs is like departments, cost centers, profit centers, reporting relationships, like formal teams, that sort of thing. And like none of the things I cared about happened that way. Like all of the work was cross-functional. It was all highly dynamic. It wasn't going to show up on any work chart.
Yeah.
And I asked the team of engineers to like build me a prototype. Like pretend we're Facebook, like where now I know this is called organizational network analysis. I had no clue. Right? But basically connect our business systems and like show me what we look like as a graph, like who works with whom and what. And when I saw a picture, like it blew me away. I didn't believe it. I actually sent the engineers to like go find a bug in the code because this can't possibly be real. And it was like, hey, Alex, thank you for wasting a week of our time. This is now the best tested code in the world. This is real. Yeah. And I ran around and I started like validating what I was seeing, and it all validated. And the short of it was like half of our key people, like literally half of our key people, I didn't know their names, or I thought of as like smart, quote unquote, non-leaders. And they were like absolutely leading, and you could see it. And then conversely, a number of people in like designated leadership positions will be appropriate, like man-based compensation and so on. You could see people were like working around them, not through them. So like they weren't leading. And we started like using that data timidly at first and more seriously later as we got more and more confident. And just like magic started happening. And 2017-ish, I had an inkling that like this is more than like an internal little tool that Alex built on the side.
Yeah.
Gave it away to a few other organizations to use and kind of validate, and that went well. Then COVID happened and sort of crisis after crisis. But 2020, like mid 2022-ish, it was really clear to me that like this is the part of my job that I enjoy the most is building out the stuff. It's like I care about this more than the rest of my day job. So I went to the board and negotiated a spin out, and became late last year, became a startup, signed up a few customers, got some venture funding, and here we are.
Now I want to like know how many companies are birthed through this sort of a process. But John, you've been a hiring manager a lot more often than I have been. So, you know, what's your thoughts in response to all this?
Yeah, so it's really interesting kind of being on the, selling side sometimes when, in the past I've sold solutions and, I hear, for example, the company says like, oh, we have our own internal tooling. You are effectively that internal tooling that, was really effective, but then, saw that there's opportunity outside of that and other companies can benefit from it. So my hunch is that like it happens more than you and I think, but to kind of take the initiative to spin it out and build it on your own is very unique, I think. And, I think what's really cool is that, yes, Performic is a startup, like a year old, but you have like a decade or close to a decade of validation, and kind of like entrepreneurship to kind of like incubate this and actually make it work at a very large publicly traded company too. And I think that that's kind of unique about this, and so I'm curious to dive in more too about, you mentioned there were some what you thought were bugs in the code.
Yeah, I want to know what those bugs were. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I think kind of what I'm getting at with this is that there's, I think, some assumptions and biases that happen in kind of like our status quo performance management processes and performance review processes that companies go through. So I'm curious, Alex, like, what is it that you were seeing early on, and what made you think that, like, hey, this can't actually be right, but then like created some ahas after you started to validate the data yourself, as you said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the very, very short of it, right? The very, very short of it is we basically have a massive, unless we manage it very, very carefully, we have a massive self-promoter bias. Like if we look at people on our teams and our companies kind of on these two axes of how well we present and how well we perform, there are like the places where those line up are clear. Like the people who are great at both, are leaders, are known leaders, or effectively love them, they're great, they're wonderful. Like nothing to do there. Right? And then of course we have the people who are bad at both, who are underperforming, but it's clear. And there we can try to rescue them. We can get them support. If it doesn't work, then we wind up terminating them. But those problems, for the most part, like we know how to deal with. We're okay. But these other two quadrants are the problematic ones. Like on one hand, we have the people who present better than they perform. Right? And they wind up getting overcompensated, overpromoted. It's unfair. It's actually the source of a lot of the kind of like systemic bias that we see. It's like it's unfair in systemic ways. It kind of favors the privileged. But that's half the story. The other half of the story is that like these are folks who wind up taking responsibility for like really important stuff, and they're not set up to succeed. And by the way, the right answer a lot of the time isn't to like identify them and fire them. It's to like actually support them in being successful. They're good at half of this. Like communication's a big deal. And a lot of the time we can actually prop them up on the performance side and things go well. But the part of a quadrant that takes for bringing this up, it's the stealth performers is a part of this that really like is my passion. Like this is again like the half of your key employees. This is amazingly consistent among Performic customers, but the half of the key employees that are leading, that are doing wonderful things, and you don't know about them. They're like their boss's boss doesn't know about them. They get passed up for promotions. They don't get to contribute, and it's a lot of value that's left on the table. But also worth mentioning is like that group for the most part doesn't look like me. And once we start identifying them and helping them and propping them up and helping them step into like positions of formal leadership, in my experience, that's actually like the one thing that moves the needle in GI for real. Like we kind of spent the last few years thinking that we're going to hire our way out of these problems. And like, it was never going to work. It didn't work. It won't work in the future. But here we have this like diverse, wonderful group of people who are already on board. They're already employees. Like they bought into the mission. And if we can identify them and prop them up like that, it's better for the business, but it's also like it's better for society.
Yeah. You mentioned the privilege part and the bias. I think that's not discussed often enough. A lot of people also just come from a culture where like, self-promo is just not a thing. So yeah, they're great at their job, but they're not great at selling that they're great at their job. Yeah.
And for a record, I'm one of those people, right? Like I grew up in the Soviet Union. I came here as a Jewish refugee from the Soviet Union. Where I grew up, it's all about humility, not sticking out, not sort of attracting too much attention to yourself for lots of reasons. And some of it, again, is just the discrimination that I grew up with. And then I had this like fascinating experience of going from like discriminating against minority and a refugee, and then getting on a plane, and now I'm like a tall, straight white guy in the US. It's actually something that I think about quite a bit. Like it stuck with me. I noticed that at 11. That like, wow, this is weird. This is a transition, and it's kind of crazy that societies work this way.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, John knows I hate attention. I have no ego, and I am the most quiet, timid person on the planet. Right, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all teammates and a community person, right?
Yeah. It's exactly
Right.
what you want in somebody who is paid to make noise for a living, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know you that well, but I'm laughing already. Right?
Yeah.
I'm so shy, so afraid.
So I'm wondering if we can, pull this thread a little bit more too, Alex, is like, kind of tell me a little bit more about, when you talk about DEI being important initiatives at companies, and usually it comes in the form of, hey, hire externally, maybe create some, groups internally, employee ERGs, for example. But what you're saying is that, hey, by taking kind of this approach, you can identify kind of the silent kind of stealth top performers that people are already leading, or that are already leading people internally. People are already following, but maybe just like haven't gotten the acknowledgement, or have been kind of overlooked, which is kind of like very common when you look at bias in organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, and to be clear, I think it's really important that we should be doing all of these things. Right.
Yeah.
I have like wonderful experience being the exec sponsor for a couple of ERGs, and like we did great work. They were wonderful. But like, and yes, absolutely, as we hire, like we should be making sure that at the very least we're not doing bad things, but ideally maybe even are trying to sort of move a needle in the positive direction. But again, like in my experience, like the massive missed opportunity, it's the people we already have. Like they're already on board. They signed up. They're like they bought into the mission of the company. They're doing great work. And if we let them go unnoticed, like it affects our business. But it's also like again it's like it's just like profoundly unfair.
Yeah, I think also if you start with the people on your team that they're already bought into your point, right? You'll be able to attract more people like them, and you'll kind of have this like spider web effect of diversity in your culture. You know, I mean, I'm a gay man, but like other queer people are going to come to me before they apply to a company that I work at or have worked at, and go like, you know, did you feel safe working there? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You know, we know what part of me working there I know they're asking about. You know, so like, yeah, we had so many episodes about employer branding and, you know, the word of mouth effect that happens after people even work at the company, even if I left the place on good terms. You want me to still talk positively. You know, what was it like working for Danny Essner at Troops? Like, he doesn't even work there anymore, but I still speak very highly of him.
This kind of brings like my favorite point, like when it comes to brand of any sort, right? Like internal, external, and so on. There's what we say and what we do. And we can say all the right things, but if we don't do all of the right things, like they fall flat. People get so like, generally speaking, like especially the modern workforce, like people have wonderful bullshit detectors, right? Like people smell hypocrisy a mile away, and this is where like talking about things the right way is like very, very important. Language matters, et cetera, et cetera. Like we all know this. But if we say these things, but then like routinely under promote like people of certain types, and again, whether they're minorities or maybe they're just quiet, like maybe they're just introverts, maybe they're not neurotypical, right? Like when we routinely overlook those people, we can have the best public facing brand in the world. We might even be able to get people in, but they show up and it's not, and what they get is not what they're sold. Which is why, like my focus, and this is where I think there's like this wonderful segue between what we do and what Worklyfe does. But my focus has been like the foundational work of making sure that our incentive structures, like the way we manage performance and like evaluate performance, but also like proactively manage it, not in the like firing people sense. Like a lot of people, when they think about performance management, it's like a euphemism for firing people. In a nicely paper trailed and documented way, which is not at all what I mean, though unfortunately we do need to do that too every once in a while. But like proactively managing performance, like it props people up. It can create this like rising tide that lifts all the boats and makes a company successful, and now the pie gets bigger. And that's a part that I've spent like my career in the space the last like decade-ish, like hyper focused on. And once that is right, when what that foundation is there, there's all of these other wonderful things that you can and should be doing. Which I think again, like Worklyfe and Performic actually make like a wonderful 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I could see someone wanting both, especially at a correct. So I haven't touched Performica, so I guess, like, where would one start with? It sounds like Performica comes before Worklife, or Performa is macro in comparison.
Not necessarily. I just think they address the two parts of like we all want happy, engaged, productive people, right? And in order to be happy, engaged, and productive, there's really kind of two. There's kind of two parts of it, and there's like this wonderful overlap between our philosophies when it comes to like
So I guess I'm trying to wrap my brain around the fact, like, I've never had to manage enough people to necessitate a performer. my team could fit in this call, that we're already doing.
Yeah, no, this is our, like, at least, like, John, I don't know about your experience, but I've experienced like in the thousands globally, right? Like, and so what we focus on is again a system of like a really, really clever system of getting like the right kind of feedback that doesn't make people uncomfortable and so on, that leads into a more fair and equitable like incentive structure essentially, that helps understand like how does an individual fit into the fabric of the organization, like who goes to them for mentorship, who leans on their technical skills, like how basically like how they fit into the flow of work getting done, so that we like really understand the individual. And I think from what and like John, correct me if I'm wrong, like Worklyfe starts there is like really understanding the individual, to make sure that we're basically like rewarding them in the right ways, and not trying to do some sort of cookie cutter like comp and benefits package for the 21-year-old out of college and the like 60-something-year-old who's about to retire, who have completely different like needs, priority stages in life, and so on.
Yeah, for sure. And I think maybe to also address what you're talking about, Evan, I think a roadblocker that I see for a lot of HR organizations, when they think about like, okay, how do we create the right incentive structures? How do we incent the right behaviors? How do we reward the right people? It's like, well, what is the right people? How do we even go about identifying those people? So, having kind of launched 400 plus kind of recognition programs with companies in the past, the hardest part is always figuring out, well, how much do we spend and who do we spend it on?
It's the who.
And it's like, part of that is because not every single job is quantifiable, right? We use sales incentives as an example. It's very easy to like calculate whether or not someone hit a sales incentive, right? It's probably the most math-based performance role in a company. But when you get into other kind of roles in a company, like the accounting department or the HR team or like the operations team, they don't always have something quantifiable. Maybe it's like a project deadline, maybe like, did you hit it or not? But there isn't always something like quantifiable about their performance that makes it really clear on how to recognize and who to recognize. And so I think that's kind of like where the overlap starts to come in, Alex, is that, it's very difficult, especially at scale, to get it right. Especially when you have things like recency bias, you have like, kind of like relationship with manager factors into it, like how buddy you are with them. You have like biased kind of, peer feedback reviews that factor into it. Typically you have manager feedback that they wait until like the last week of a 6-month review cycle to like give you your feedback. And it's like, well, they only remember what happened the last like 2 or 3 weeks. That's what they're going to do. You know what I mean? So those are all like, that's kind of like par for the course when it comes to, well, who do we actually recognize? And so I think that's where it's like really interesting how you're going about it, Alex, that it's like, hey, using kind of like a tool that's been in place for close to a decade and that's based on like how people are actually interacting in the organization and remove some of that bias is almost like a shortcut for companies to figure that out. And that kind of first part of this episode is like, how to identify your best people. You know what I mean? That's usually the hardest part.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's consistently like when I saw it, my jaw dropped, right? Like when our customers like see it for the first time, it's like this very, very, very consistent sort of like aha moment that is like actually so rewarding, so rewarding to watch. And I think basically like there's kind of two, there's like in Performic there are like two like essentially basic innovations, right? Like call them shortcuts. One is, again, we figured out how to like understand how the company is actually wired, and like you want to know that. Like if you want to be human centric, you can't be human centric if you're staring at like work charts or like even like I love when you look at financial statements, right? It always makes me laugh, right? Like your people are in the liability column.
Yeah.
And when we think of people as like boxes on a chart, right? Like or liabilities in our financial statements, like we're not going to be human centric. And then the other thing that we figured out is how to basically like get the right feedback in a way where like people don't hate it and people don't lie. Like we did extensive customer research, like obviously, right? Like we did and continue to do extensive customer research. And with a typical like peer feedback system where it's like, hey, Alex, it's time for you to get feedback, nominate like 5 people who are going to provide that feedback for you. And then those people get to write essays about whether or not I'm a good performer, effective communicator, or whatever it is. Like the crazy part is that out of everybody we talked to, there was exactly one person who told us that they always tell the truth. And like love him to death. He's kind of a psychopath, high math. Right? But outside of him, psychopath in the best way, by the way. Right? Like,
John's gonna log off, and Evan's a psychopath in the worst way. Like,
but everybody else tells us that like they always lie, right? Like they're in this incredibly uncomfortable situation where like I know that John nominated me to provide feedback. It may or may not be quote unquote anonymous. I have to write an essay about how effective a communicator he is, and like I'm just not going to tell the truth the vast majority of the time. And lately, everybody tells me that they just have ChatGPT write those essays. So like, not only are they not telling the truth, they're actually.
I must be the weird one. I am the weird. I don't relate to this. I am the weird one, I think, in this anomaly.
There's always. I like to think of myself as pretty straightforward, but when I started like really scrutinizing it, and of course I have like years and years and years of like every single thing that I provided over the years. Like, yeah, no, totally. I totally softened the punches. Like, I might be less conflict avoidant than a lot of people, but like, yeah, no, I'm guilty. That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
I can't relate.
That's amazing. I'm curious too, like, so just from your experience, Alex, what do like yourself and others that you've seen, okay, now that you've started to identify some of your top performers, what do you do about it? You know, and obviously from our side of things, it's like, hey, you need to recognize them. You need to reward them, right? That's a key part of it. I'm curious what else you're seeing, companies do, good leaders, even if it's not company wide, like what are they doing to keep their best people? Once, let's say, for example, you do identify one of those, stealth top performers. What are some takeaways on what companies and leaders can think about doing for those people?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two sides to it, right? One side is that like being seen and heard and appreciated actually goes a long way, and especially for people who are not used to being seen, heard, and appreciated. So like that alone is kind of a big deal. And then typically what we had a lot of great experiences with is, again, start working with those people, like really understand their like needs and aspirations. And what we've done is really focused on like nudging them and sometimes convincing them, because again, there are sort of many in that group like have a history of not being seen that way. So the first time that conversation happens, it's like it feels weird. But really understanding like what is it that drives them, like what is it that they're passionate about, do they like what are their career aspirations? And again, like we come at it from a very different side. Like And I'll let you talk about the sort of rewards, benefits, incentives, and so on, because like you understand the world a lot better than I do. I'm not an expert by any means, but where we've been focusing and where our customers who do this very well have been focusing is like really understanding like, hey, we have this like high potential, high performing person. What can we do? Is it leadership training? Is it like connecting with a right mentor? Is it the right stretch project? Is it again like really understanding like, are they in their role now because they've been stuck and they haven't had the opportunity? Like, do they actually want to be doing something different? And then like as specific as you get to the individual, the better you do. And then of course, right, it's important to like recognize and reward them financially. But like if you do just that, it doesn't really help. Like it is important to pay people fairly for work that they do, right? Identify like again, just like better resolution on how much value people bring to the table, like is important from like the compensation equity perspective, among other things. But like what really changes careers and moves the needle for people is like getting to know them, getting to understand them, and start seeing where like their needs and aspirations and desires, like professional desires, match up with value that can be created for a company. And I have example of people who wound up in like vastly different roles. Some of them have started companies. Like I'm having CEO to CEO conversations with some of the like stealth performers we identified back in the day. Right now, they're like giving me advice on how to be a good CEO because in some cases they're like actually more experienced at this than I am. And it's like, it is so wonderful. Like it's such a rewarding thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. A few things, just going back to what you said earlier about, you know, employees kind of being in the liabilities kind of column. You know, it is unfortunate, but that is like the math and the accounting of an organization, right? And so we kind of talk about, okay, there's should be a healthy tension in an organization between the employee and employer, meaning there should be some forms of mutual accountability.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of times it's very lopsided where like employees very, very much are just liabilities that are trying to be minimized on the kind of the balance sheet. So kind of how I look at it is what you said, you know, understanding what actually motivates people and actually drives them is super important. It's kind of the hallmark of a good manager, of good leaders, to understand the people on your team. And what I found and what we've found, like over, you know, the last year and a half working with companies, is that by understanding why people want, for example, a promotion, or why people want to maybe not be promoted and stay in a role. Evan, you've talked like multiple times on like, I'm not a manager. I'm cool just being in an IC. That's great.
Yeah,
That's
I love coaching, I love teaching, but stops there. Like it stops there. Yeah.
Like understanding those things about your people are crucial because you might push someone in the wrong direction or not have their best interests in mind. I think it goes back to like, well, what is that healthy tension? You know, it's a mixture of, as a for-profit company, understanding that, hey, yes, employees are a cost on your balance sheet, but the productivity and what they contribute to your business can be tenfold. You know, if you don't treat them as liabilities. You know, if you treat them as assets.
I was about to say, this makes it really cold sounding. You know, it just really makes the relationship even more transactional than it inherently is.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, on the flip side, you know, there's you know, employees have to also realize that like, hey, if the business doesn't exist, you don't have a job, right? Yeah. And so there needs to be kind of a healthy push-pull where it's like, hey, yes, as an employee, you want more, you want to like accomplish the things that you want in life, but you have to also realize like, what am I contributing and how do I kind of keep the objectives and the goals of the company top of mind so that as I'm performing, I'm also being rewarded. And that's like, you know, from our perspective, it's like, well, how do you actually create a win-win? And it's by aligning the things that the company cares about with the things that you care about as an individual. And so kind of tying it all together, like where it kind of jumps from like performance management to then like, well, how do you keep your best people foundationally across the board? Like from day one, before they even get hired, you should, in the interview process, you should understand like what their goals are. You should understand like what they're striving for and why they want this role and things like that. And as they kind of continue, and as you kind of your relationship develops, and over the weeks, months, and years that they're at your company, like we feel like, hey, you should continually make progress towards helping those things in their personal life. Yeah, so that's my.
I'm just feeling like we need to do an episode where it's like John like writes out all of this, but using me as the employee you've tested it on. You know, might be a great sample size, but
We might have some outliers in that conversation.
I'm just gonna get like all of my former managers on one live stream, so you can all just like talk about how difficult I was to align with the company.
Yeah, no, John, I actually want to double down on what you said. Like, I think this is critical, and I think that, like, in many organizations we talk to, one of the things that like, I mean, frankly, kind of baffles me is how disconnected the employee experience side of like the HR effort is from the performance management side of the HR effort. And in my view, and this is something I feel incredibly strongly about, is like you gotta look at them holistically, right? Because if you have one side that is driven by like retention and engagement, and those are their KPIs, and another side that's driven by like being very clear and setting clear goals and accountability and so on, just like creates this natural conflict where there doesn't need to be one. And then on the sort of employee experience and reward side, we're sort of spreading the rewards like inconsistently and sort of under incentivizing the right people, over incentivizing the wrong people. We're just like kind of getting it wrong. And then on the performance side, like if you think of just that, it's really, really easy to get into this like, again, like transactional or like mindset where like ultimately like engaged people are more performant, happier people are more performant. Right. And like performance management is employee experience. Like, and that's why I'm like so excited about like, if we figure out how to like bridge the gap together somehow, because like it is bridging.
Totally. I'm kind of having a lot of, in hindsight, like, oh, I get why I was frustrated back then moments as you talk about this, Alex, because you guys have 10 years of professional experience on me as a minimum in this regard. So most of my career has been IC. And it's like, when it comes to reporting and performance, to your point, it's always been like, do I get to keep my job or not keep my job? Is how I viewed it as the employee. And a lot of the times in the past, when I was more green, my frustrations would come with like, well, if you had told me that earlier, I would have been able to avoid this altogether. And then like you as the employer, like, well, can I say that? Because that might come across as rude. But at the same time, like, I'm not so green that I don't know that is actually the problem. Like, if you had just told me that was what you needed me to focus on, because like, it's like, well, we have one-on-ones every week, so you know what your benchmarks are. I'm like, yeah, but now you're telling me this one benchmark is like 10 times more important than everything else. I'm like, if you had told me that 3 months ago, like I've been focusing on the wrong piece of the puzzle this whole time. So yeah, you just don't get a lot of like why the performance management is the way that it is, the behind the scenes of it all. And you're just like, all I know is every week I'm plugging numbers into a spreadsheet, because seldomly is what I do for a living. The stats of the KPIs that my manager wants are seldomly the same KPIs that I have to use on myself to make sure I'm doing my job correctly. What I show John is not the same information that I use to inform me. I give John information that's relevant to John, but I only know how to do that from years of giving bosses and clients the wrong information and learning over time. I wish somebody just sat down with me and just told me like, this is what matters.
Yeah, this is where, again, in an ideal world, like this is a two-way conversation. Because like, look, as employees, like I'm constantly being evaluated, right? Like John, you'll relate to this, right? Like like people think that like once you make it and you're in charge, right? Like you get to your thing. Like, no, not at all. We're under a tremendous amount of scrutiny and pressure. In fact, like, much more so than I've ever been when I was like an individual contributor or something.
And that's why I have no interest in being VP of introvert here.
Yeah, and what winds up happening is like we put people in these positions where like they know they're being evaluated, but the rubric is not clear, and that's just like bad place to be, and it feels like a minefield, right? So like you're playing some game, and that game gets ruled.
Yeah, and then you're wondering why like that person's working
like,
not as well.
Away from you. Yeah, but you don't know what they are, so you're kind of poking around, like what you said just really resonated. You're like poking through trial and error, trying to figure out how
yeah, I sometimes wonder like how far along would I be now? Not that I'm not far along, but like I could have done more for myself and for these companies if they were just a little more honest and straightforward at the beginning, instead of just like assuming that I got it. And I'm like, did you get it when you had this job? No.
Yeah,
Okay, great. Then I don't get it either. I'm like,
so for the record, now I'm gonna defend the manager, right? But like,
yeah,
I think like I've seen dishonesty when it comes to this sort of thing. But like, frankly, for the most part, like the vast majority of people, right, like are good people trying to do their best.
yeah.
Right? They're good people.
Something John's been trying to drill into my head. He's trying to teach me to be less cynical. Yeah. Not all managers are assholes, Evan.
Yeah, but like when you're trying to do your best, like in the absence of good tooling and information, like some people are good enough that they like figure it out and naturally get it, and like again, like love those people. Thank you that you exist. But like most of us mortals, like we need help, we need frameworks, we need tools and systems, and like this stuff ain't rocket science. But most of the places where I see those sort of things derail, like the tragedy of it all, is that these are like good people who are honestly trying, and like maybe they're conflict avoidant. Like maybe like you as my manager need to deliver some feedback to me, but you don't want to hurt my feelings, so you kind of procrastinate. And in the absence of like a forcing function of some sort, like a structure for it, like then like I'm doing something wrong, I don't know about it, you're continuing to be frustrated. At some point in time this all blows up. Like by the time we find out, it's really hard to fix. And like it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
Totally.
I'm thinking about the fact that like I've had that happen where on the receiving end, to your point, we keep going back and forth on the different sides of this table here, but it's because like by the time I do find out, you know, especially if it's been so long, you check out. It's really hard to buy back in, you know, because you talked a lot of like the people have already bought into the company's mission and goal. I'm like, I've lost that. I'm no longer bought in at that point. So that's usually when I'm thinking all these things now in my career now making more sense. Actually, as we're talking, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the moment I decided to go elsewhere.
Yeah,
that was the moment I decided to like take control over my career and go get that job that I really wanted elsewhere, or try the same thing again, like take that foot in the door job and maybe this time it'll work, you know. Yeah.
It's like a breach of trust, right? Like if I work for you, and like different companies talk about their cultures in different ways, but like this is non-controversial, right? Like if I work for you, it is your job to provide me feedback and to make sure that I'm aware of like what's going right and what's going wrong. And like, and when it doesn't happen, it's like, well, you've been unhappy with my performance for about 6 months and I'm only hearing about it now because it's the end of the year and I'm not getting my bonus. Like that feels bad. Like,
well,
give me real-time feedback. Sorry, John, what were you gonna say?
No, it's so true. And I think one of the things that you said, Alex, is like it's like walking through a minefield. It's like that's the definition of not being in a psychologically safe environment, which most HR leaders subscribe to kind of like Maslow's hierarchy. Like that's the most foundational level. Like that's just the starting point, right? Well, I guess technically physiological needs is, but like that psychological safety is like one of the foundational parts. And kind of answering the second part of the question is like, how do you keep your best people? It's not always explicit and like visible, like, oh, I didn't make enough money, therefore, I'm looking for higher pay elsewhere. Sometimes, a lot of times it starts with those smaller kind of interactions where it's like, hey, over time, trust erodes. And what used to be a healthy tension is now like a full-on onslaught, what it feels like from one side, right? And so, or full-on like polling from the other side, that's just like disproportionate. And so I think what is really interesting, kind of like with the approach that you're taking too, Alex, is that it's not reliant on, just kind of people using ChatGPT to fill out like a 2-paragraph feedback form. There's kind of like
Evan writes a note for future reference. Use ChatGPT.
Yeah, so it's more so all about kind of like, okay, what are kind of the day-to-day interactions? Like, is there a way that we kind of more proactively can identify some of these things? Because it's not just about performance management. It's kind of a foundationally like, okay, how can we start to identify when someone starts to drop off. Maybe someone was like a go-to person and they are no longer, or people are starting to go around them, or like people just that were high performers are starting to kind of trail off a little bit. Like there's so much underneath that besides just the very obvious, like, oh, I'm not being paid enough, or like I feel miffed because someone else got recognized even though I did equal or more work type of stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of these things, again, like if you identify them, you can do stuff about them, because maybe my performance was dropping off because I burned out. I worked heroically like on the last project, and now I'm burned out. I just need some time off. Maybe something's going on with my family. Like maybe I have a health issue that nobody knows about. Like if you like catch these things and approach it with curiosity and like kind of like if you have an early enough signal, like many of the sorts of things that wind up with people quitting in disgust or getting fired are like very, very fixable and easily fixable, and like strengthen the relationship and like build trust along the way. And that's where, again, like just going back to the feedback piece, like at Performica, we kind of turned how we collect feedback on its head. So like rather than asking people to like explicitly evaluate each other in a way that is like really, really hard, and we talked about this at length, what we wind up doing is like we ask people like, who do you go to for this? Like, who do you go to for that? And given that we know who you work with already, it's like the simplest user experience in the world, where it's like, hey Evan, here's 15 people who like you collaborate with on these projects. Like, who are the key technical contributors? Like, who do you go to lean on their technical expertise? And you have an opportunity to like say click, and next. And maybe the next question is like, when things get hard, who provides support? Or like, out of these people, if you were to disappear tomorrow, who would you miss the most? But you're like, we're getting people to talk about themselves. Like no one's giving each other grades anymore, right? Because
just something they're more familiar with is basically the angle you're taking it. I could talk trash about myself for hours. We just saw that for the 45 minutes of this thing.
Oh, and you know who you're like, you know who you go to. And as we present that list, like the other key thing is, if you just ask that question, is like, hey Evan, who are your mentors? What winds up happening in most cases is that, again, there's that same personality bias. Like in the absence of that, like we kind of think of like the loud, memorable people who take up a lot of space. And then we get all of this like research on like the power law distribution, and that companies supposedly have a small number of rock stars that are heads and shoulders above the rest of the peons. And that's not how life works. That's crazy. Like in reality, there's a lot more like leadership, and there's a lot more like top performance going on. And when we like ask you to like give credit from a list of people, it turns out that like you will think of the quiet ones, and everybody will get the credit they deserve. And it completely changes the picture. And now we understand again that there's this class of like some of our most valuable employees that like without a system like this, like we will inevitably and routinely overlook, unless like there is that like wonderful manager of theirs who's very good at picking out that kind of talent, which does happen. Like it happens routinely, but just not consistently.
Yeah. I like how you phrased it too early on as you were talking, like the proactive communication part of it. It's very tempting for managers and for companies to just pretend that some of these challenges don't exist. So just don't talk about it. And the way that I look at it kind of at Worklyfe too is like very similarly how like people have kind of personal goals. They have kind of ambitions and things they want to do in life that are maybe like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years away. Just because you don't talk about them doesn't mean they don't exist, and like ignoring them doesn't actually help you as a company or as a leader. It actually creates risk in your organization, because in the back of people's minds, or explicitly as they're talking to their family and their friends and their loved ones, they're optimizing for those things in their life that matter to them. And, if you don't talk about those things, if you don't surface them, if you don't like make that part of your conversations in how you interact, in your one-on-ones, then you're going to get blindsided. You're going to be surprised when they put in their 2-week notice and you find out for the first time that actually I'm trying to save up extra money so that I can put a down payment on the house, or my kids are going to college, or I've been wanting to take this trip to like visit my family in like, I don't know, Greece, because I've never met them, or whatever it may be, right? And so like kind of how I look at it too is that like, okay, as an effective leader, like I think what you said is approach it with curiosity, which I think is really cool. It's kind of like reflective of a growth mindset. It's like you want to get to the right answer, and the right answer might be, hey, this person's only going to be here for like 2 years before they need to go on to something else. And so by knowing that going in, I think a lot of leaders do get graded on retention. Like, what is the average tenure of the people on your team? But it's so superficial. It's like only part of the equation. It's like, you know, who knows? Like, you could attract amazing talent, which is a great thing, but amazing talent needs opportunity. Amazing talent needs like some of the things that you talked about too. Like, they need career progression. They need to be doing all these other things. And if as a company, like either because of your stage or where you're at in market, or because of your product market fit, or because of things outside of that person's control, if you can't create those opportunities, they should probably go somewhere else. And as a company, like, again, your job isn't to try to keep that person hostage as long as you can. It's about like understanding like, okay, cool. You want to do these 2 things in the next like 2 to 3 years. We're going to try our hardest for the next 2 or 3 years to figure out how to get you there. Like, and you know, how we speak to it at Worklyfe is it like, tell me like why? Tell me why is this motivating you? Like, what is underneath it? What are some of the things that you want to like do in your life, like the next 6 or 12 months or 5 years? And by making that the anchor and the cornerstone, it's interesting. You're more likely to have that person stay and perform at your company, because now it's not, I need to go make more money so I can do those things. It's like, my work now is actually affording me the opportunity very clearly to do those things. And other opportunities are probably going to come up if I'm a top performer, but I know there's a clear line of sight between the great work I'm doing at my company and how that's supporting the things that I care about in my life. And that's like the world we're trying to create. And so, I love that you kind of started to weave some of those things in there and how you think about like performance management.
The other thing you get, by the way, is you get boomerang hires. And this is something I'm like super proud of, right? Like over my years out in the ETA, like we've had a number of like key people leave and then come back in a year and a half. And maybe they left because they thought the grass was greener on the other side, looked around, decided that it's not, and came back. But at least in a couple of cases, these are people who like, whose goal was to take a trip around the world. And they like got there, like resigned, took a trip around the world, and came back. And as soon as they came back to us as like, hey, if there's a role for me, I want it, because like you supported me, you understood me, you heard me, like this is, and that like the number like at scale and over the years, this is hard to measure in the moment, but I think the number of like high performing boomerang hires is actually like a really, really critical way to look at like how good your culture is, how good your organization is. When it happens a lot, you're doing something right.
So this is going to be the young one doesn't know how to measure managers question here. So you boomerang hires. I had a boss, Joe Caprio, shout out to him, one of the best bosses I've ever had in my entire career. And a lot of the people that he hired were former employees at different companies. So is that like another healthy way to measure, is like how many people are following that individual leader? Like, I want to come work for him again, even though it's at a different company.
Well, so that is tricky, right? Because when it depends on which side of this you're on, right? Like,
got it.
You make a wonderful hire, they pull in their network of wonderful people who have worked together before and so on. Like, that's a great thing. When you're at the receiving end of it, right? And like some key leader leaves, and next thing you know, you don't have a team. Like, that's really hard. And this is, again, to John, to your point, like, this is why it's so important to understand, like, what people are motivated by, what keeps them here, what are they working toward, and so on, so that, like, you can get ahead of this domino effect. And on one hand, like, there's a side of Performic that helps with this, right? So like, and we even have a mod, like, we have an automated workflow for this. Right, like if a person leaves, we know exactly who is working really, really closely with them, And like
So they're at high risk of leaving too, basically.
Yeah, we can flag it. It's like, go talk to those people. Like if you haven't, if you don't know what keeps them here, if you don't know what they're excited about, like if you don't know what opportunities they're looking for right now, is like figure it out fast, because they're like 7x more likely to leave than anybody else in the next 3 months. So like get after it. But again, like the more we understand, like the more we understand like the motive, like the right way to reward, motivate, like inspire the people who do great work for us, the less susceptible we are to, again, the sort of like the industry term for us is attrition contagion. And it's tremendously powerful, it turns out. And the only way to see it is if you have this like network, because it's all cross-functional. But once you see it, it's this like incredibly powerful effect, it turns out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I haven't been a manager that's had to look at these charts before, but I don't have to have been one to have seen it, and have been a part of like the group of people that have like, oh, they're gone. Well, that's not a good sign. I guess I'm gonna leave too, like, and then like it just spreads like a disease within the company. I wonder how many stats there's at, like how many people leave because their best friend left, the company, or their great boss left.
I mean, again, there's like the surveys, like the surveys out there are kind of inconsistent. Like people try to get at this through exit interviews, but exit interviews, in my experience, are like actually really fraught, because people, like, you don't, like, you're on your way out, like you're just trying to like wrap things up nicely. But what I do know is that like a close collaborator of yours resigns, you're now 6x more likely to leave in the next 3 months. And this is like real data from Performica. We know this over years, right? A couple of those people, like, what we don't really understand is like the non-linearities. We know that when like a few people around you are gone, it's now like it actually compounds, but like the contagion effects are like massive. And again, there's nothing you can do about it. Like, again, we're not trying to like keep people hostage, right? Like people are free to go, but what we can do is, again, like understand them really, really well, and hopefully give them like good reasons to stay, and
refer people to come to you.
That, by the way, is the other thing we know, is when that process is followed, the risk goes from 6x base down to actually below baseline. So like if like say like my like buddy in marketing who I work really closely with just left, like, John, you're my boss, you're my team lead, you know about this, like you sit down with me and you kind of do all of the right things, and then like actually check back in and like fulfill your commitments and so on. Like my risk of exiting the company is now like lower than it was had nothing happened.
That's really interesting.
You don't do these things at 6x.
Yeah. So it's not even that you reduce it from like 6x to 3x. It's like it goes down below what a normal attrition rate would be. Or normal. Wow.
Because like we're routinely, like, unfortunately, there's like routinely these things aren't happening. And this is sort of a trigger for the right things to start happening. And like when we do this well, we're doing them all along, and then it's just like a very different story. And again, this is where performance, like one of the things we're helping our customers with is just that.
That's awesome. Well, as we wrap things up, I'll play the outro video in a moment here. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Can you let us know where people can learn more about you and Performica?
So performica.com, or if you want to talk to me, alex@performica.com. I'm pretty responsive, and I, as you noticed, I can talk about these things for hours. Thank you so much for having me. This is a treat. This is a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for being had. You're really good at also articulating these rather nuanced problems, which I think, it's fantastic that you not only get it so well, but you know how to make it make sense to somebody like John, who's got a lot more years in this than me, who's like, I didn't ask a lot of questions because I'm still trying to learn what the hell you two are talking about. I've never done your job. Like, I've only been on one side of this table. Yeah, well, no, I learned a lot in this. I now I'm over here, like, have to go and look at my resume. Like, how many times did that happen?
Yeah, like many times. Like the answer will be like a number of times, right? Like,
yeah, as we talked about before we hit
universal
live, Evan's quarter life crisis is just about to get a lot deeper. All right. Well, we'll be back next week. I believe Lauren Sermon's going to be on our show next week. So stay tuned for some announcements regarding that. I'm sure we'll chop this video up, but you give us a ton of great sound bites, Alex. I'll be using these a lot on our social, and yes, I can send them to you if you want to use them. Yeah, thank you so much. John, any closing statements before I play this video that everybody has seen 19 times?
No, just again, thank you, Alex. I love the approach, like the foundational data based, and I love the heart behind how you're trying to solve this problem to, get to the truth. Find out who your actual top performers are, not just the loudest talkers, not just the people that, fully internally. And so I love
just
it.
People of Evan's snark. Yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to kind of continually working together and figuring out how we can solve this for companies. So thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank you. Bye.
Do you know what motivates your employees to perform at work? Do you know what inspires them and keeps them engaged? Many leaders don't. Sales managers have to constantly think up creative new sales incentives, and HR teams strive to help people feel valued, appreciated, and happy. Millions are spent on various initiatives, but it's mostly a guessing game, and it often misses the mark. More than 45% of people feel that their needs are not met at work. 34% of employees are actively disengaged, and 29% are actively looking for a new job. How do you tap into people's intrinsic motivators to drive performance? How do you reward people in a way that meets their individual needs without breaking the bank? Worklyfe has the answer. Worklyfe is an employee motivation and individualized incentives platform. We help companies link business objectives directly to their employees' unique intrinsic motivators to drive business performance. By tapping into what truly motivates and inspires people, companies can create a win-win scenario just by spending differently than they are now. Let's start with employees first. Worklyfe uses positive psychology to help employees identify ways that they can improve happiness and tap into what truly inspires them. Our science-based framework guides employees through a process of uncovering their motivators, setting meaningful goals, and tracking their progress towards them. In order to provide a distinct path toward making their goals a reality, we enable employees to open a work-life balance, a special bank account dedicated to storing sacred money for the passions and pursuits they've identified. Employees can use their work-life balance to accomplish whatever's important to them, such as travel, education, or experiences. With this approach, choice is offloaded to employees and eliminates friction for fulfillment. Leaders no longer have to manage reimbursements and receipts or cobble together multiple vendors to make everyone happy. With this established, we're now ready to motivate. We give companies a number of tools to align their business objectives directly with their employees' dreams and passions. They can contribute to employees' work-life balances through incentives, reward programs, and various fringe benefits and entitlement programs. For example, you can run sales contests through Worklife's incentive programs, which will allow your reps to see each other's progress towards the objective and the personal goals that motivate them. When you're ready, just pay out the incentive in Worklyfe and watch as your reps live out what matters to them. No more ordering or redeeming or coordinating or reimbursing. You can create anniversary and birthday programs to automatically reward and celebrate employees at key milestones. Employees can attach something personally meaningful to upcoming milestones, so they have something to look forward to. You can also make spot rewards and spiffs more meaningful by rewarding people through Worklife and contributing directly towards the dreams, passions, and goals that motivate them and make them happy. Every initiative you create in Worklife helps employees feel more connected to their work and more motivated to achieve their goals. When employees are happy and motivated, they're more productive and engaged at work. This leads to better business results for the company, as well as a more fulfilling and rewarding experience for your employees. If you're looking for the best way to improve employee happiness, productivity, and engagement, all while consolidating costs and maximizing impact, then Worklyfe is the right solution for you. Book a demo or click to learn more about how we can help you create a more productive and flourishing work environment for your people with Worklyfe.